Brilliant. Thank you for coming on.
Oh, anytime. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate this. I enjoy these things. I really do. So it's always nice to sort of come on and do this sort of stuff. So no, thank you.
Yeah, I've been following your content for a while, and it's quite interesting.
Thank you.
Do you wanna talk me through the name, the Champagne
The
Socialist?
name, the Champagne Socialist name. Yeah. So a Champagne Socialist is basically someone who espouses socialist principles and ideals, but lives a life of privilege. And it's usually a term that is used to dismiss a left-wing person's argument, a middle-class left-wing person's argument.
Okay.
Um, so I chose that name because when I was younger, I was fairly left-wing, and it was something my mama always used to call me. And then when I started doing TikTok, I thought you need a snappy username. You need good content and a good username that kind of people hear and go, "Oh yeah, I know that. Yeah, that's quite distinct." Because Harry politics, who's going to want to listen to that? So for me, I chose that username as a way of sort of getting sort of the attention, and also I think it's also because it's used to dismiss arguments. I thought, well, if I call myself that, no one's going to be able to say that, comment that as a way of dismissing my viewpoints. So I thought, you know what, just own it. Like, yeah, I'm middle class and left wing. Like
Yeah.
it's just kind of those like, okay, like, you know what I mean?
Is there quite a big shift towards um that kind of sect now, where people from the middle class are becoming more and more left wing?
Yeah, I think we've definitely seen that. I think it's kind of, I think when you look at, I don't really know how to describe it really. I definitely think when you're younger, people tend to be more left wing. So I think it's regardless of social class, really. Um, I went to I grew up in quite well off areas, comfortable areas, and
Where did you grow up?
I grew up on the outskirts of Milton Keynes,
Okay.
which is where I'm from. Not originally, I was born in London, but sort of so lived in quite well off areas. Even though this is where I am, where my constituency is the Tory safe seat, though under current polling it looks like it might shift red. Um, but no, sort of a lot of left wing people, but then it also varies as well. I think it's just kind of the idea that as you get older, you progress more to the right,
Yeah.
um, which I think we've seen in some cases with some people. But for me personally, I feel like I've kind of just stayed very much sort of in the centre, a
Yeah.
little bit to the left.
Yeah, I think there's been studies that have shown that it's usually in your 30s, like early 30s to like mid 30s, when obviously
Yeah,
the more educated you are, the likely the chances of you earning more money,
yeah.
and that's when the shift tends to happen towards more right wing politics. So
It's interesting because some of the studies I've looked at it with terms of the more sort of terms of education, for example, the more educated you are, the more you tend to vote for sort of left wing parties or more sort of left wing policy, or support more left wing policy, I should say. Um,
does that
that sort of,
vary? Sorry, does that vary depending on what education background you have?
I think it would depend. Yeah, it obviously depends on sort of your educational background. So the number of qualifications you have, what type of qualifications you have, also to the area that you live as well. Um, I think especially sort of Brexit, for example, really sort of showed that divide in a way, in terms of how education your level of qualifications determined which way you voted in that referendum. Likewise with the 2019 general election, for example, when you look at that sort of polling, though people who had higher levels of qualifications tended to vote either mainly Lib Dem or Labour. Um, but then I think that's because that was sort of like a rerun of the Brexit referendum. So it would
Yeah.
be more likely that the people who would vote Leave would vote Conservative.
Okay. So where do your politics kind of align? Because in the videos that I've seen, you don't really, uh, you don't identify just as Labour. Like you do kind
No,
of pick and mix, right?
yeah, no. So I've kind of talked about sort of pick and mix politics, which is like the idea, kind of like you imagine like pick and mix in the cinema. I'm going to take some jazzies. Yes, I do jazzies. I'll have some chocolate raisins as well. Oh, you know what? I'll have some strawberry laces. You sort of mix and you take different things from different ideologies because every ideology, I suppose, to a certain extent, does have, well, within reason, I'm not talking like extreme ideologies. I'm talking more sort of like the mainstream sort of ideologies. They've
Yeah.
all got points of reason, and there are good ideas within all of those ideologies. And I think if you can harness all of them and mix them together, then maybe that could work. Obviously, some mixes don't go together. Um, so I'm always say that I don't think people could be socially liberal and economically and fiscally conservative. My reasoning for that is that economic policy influences on society. So,
Yeah.
in terms of if you're advocating for, say, austerity measures, that's going to impact people on lower incomes, which means social mobility is going to be restricted. So, I don't see how those two can really link. I know people would disagree, and people have said that they disagree, and they've tried to explain it
Do
to
you,
me.
do you want
Um,
to about tell what austerity measures would include?
So in
Because
terms of austerity measures, it tends to be cuts to its central government cuts funding to local authorities,
yeah,
or in some cases, what the central government does is they say to local authorities, "We need you to make cuts." The problem is when they're telling them to make the cuts, they're expecting them to provide the same standard of service. So, I'll give an example: Northampton County Council in 2010, this is just one of many examples. They were told you need to start making cuts, but you're being expected to provide the same standard of service. So when they make cuts, the first thing they do is cut non-statutory services. Now, what includes in non-statutory services is stuff like mental health, in term also sort of like youth clubs, that sort of thing, because it's not seen as essential.
okay,
When we think about statutory services, it's education and health. Those are like the two main things. But mental health wasn't actually included within statutory services. Um, so they were being expected to make around, I think it's 400 million. Quote me on that. I'll need to check my source on that one. But they were expected to be making all these cuts whilst providing the same standard service, which isn't feasible. Now, the neoliberal logic at the time from the coalition government was that the voluntary and community sector would step in where the state wasn't. Now, you think sort of 2010 to 2012 is what 2 to 4 years after the financial crash, where people's pockets are incredibly tight, and volunteering costs money. If you're earning, if you volunteer for 2 hours, that's 2 hours worth of pay that you could be getting, but you're instead spending that money on helping other people, which is very admirable. But not everyone can afford to volunteer.
yeah.
Um, so those services don't get the support that they need because the logic is flawed in that sort of sense. Am I making sense? I hope I'm making sense.
Yeah, no, I do understand that. I will push back on the wanting to be socially liberal but economically
Yeah,
conservative because I'd probably put myself in that category. But
yeah,
when with regards to being economically conservative, I'd probably um, be in the camp of not cutting spending to public
yeah.
services, but cutting spending to things like um, defense. I don't, especially with like the Ukraine war going on right now. I don't think it's fair that we're sending billions of dollars, pounds of aid when people literally can't afford to put their heating on.
Yeah, but I think that in regards to that, that's the reason these problems are happening. It's for the last 12 years. It's just been this build up, and then something like Ukraine happens where we where we send money, we send arms to a country defending itself from an aggressor state. It's just a build up. There's more than enough to go around, but it's because there are these cuts being made. I think we saw with the budget a few weeks ago, which has gone down very well with everyone within reason. That they are that So for example, a lot of their spending, so they've kind of said, yeah. I don't know if you saw Jeremy Hunt yesterday saying
Yeah,
that that unfortunately he's going to have to ask departments to make cuts, um, which basically is austerity 2.0. Um, but
yeah,
then austerity never really went away. It's just like the term kind of stopped being used around 2015, 2016, but it was still going because the effects are still so long lasting. Um, and I think also COVID as well has created a lot of those sort of divides um, in terms of the amount of money that had to be spent on that. Um, it's it's a whole sort of build up of things really. But no,
y-
I understand the argument of why are we sending all this why are we sending billions to the people of Ukraine when people on in the UK. I think they're saying 24 million households will face fuel poverty this winter. Um,
Yeah.
but then I would say that there's more than enough to go around, and sort of pitting two vulnerable groups against one another isn't the way. It's kind of like when refugees come to the UK and people say, well, we've got homeless people on the streets. And it's like, there's more than enough properties. There's like, I think 200,000 unused properties here in the UK. There's more than enough to cover the amount of refugees that come here and also the amount of homeless people here on our streets. So there's more than enough to go around. It's just people don't want to act. And I think actually we saw during the pandemic when it came to homelessness, they put a lot of homeless people in hotels and in
Yeah.
accommodation. So it's clear that it can be solved. It's just people don't want to solve it.
Yeah, but I mean, how feasible would it be to house all the homeless people in hotels and Airbnbs
No, I don't. Yeah, I
for an
completely
extended
take your
period of
point.
time?
I don't know the full economic sort of um, how do you say, the full sort of economic logic. Um, that would be something I have to look into. It's not something I've really sort of looked into. I think again with like a lot of this stuff, it's sort of it's all idea, and
Yeah.
there's not like the backing for it, because it's something I've always thought. But then as you said, it's actually one of the biggest things I was taught at university was. I remember I said something in a seminar, and my lecturer said to me, "What do you mean by that?" Or elaborate further. And I realised I had very strong ideas about a subject. I really hadn't like really thought the logistics through,
Being able
and so
to,
I was
okay,
like,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So I think that's just I think that kind of goes for everyone really, and I'm
Yeah.
guilty of it as well. And I think that's been seen now.
Yeah, I think, especially with the Ukraine war, there's a lot of factors that are at play that we haven't really kind of looked into because, well, you kind of have to take it all the way back where NATO has kind of encouraged and surrounded Russia basically and put up missile defenses all around Russia. So they find it threatening. And if you kind of look at the Cuban Missile Crisis, that's literally what Russia did. And the world then almost ended into a nuclear war at that point. And I
Yeah.
think we're kind of seeing it come full circle where we are closer to probably nuclear war than we've ever been before.
Things with nuclear war, it's always a last resort, and I think no one wants humanity. No one wants humanity to go extinct, because that's what would happen in the event of a nuclear war. I
Yeah,
think they say it would be
of
like what,
course.
an hour before, like, and then the whole world would completely cease. The radioactive fallout, because it's not only just like the bomb dropping and killing millions of people, it's the radioactive fallout as well, and the
Yeah,
problems there. It's why there's only been in the history of the universe, in the world, there's only ever been two uses of nuclear weapons, in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Um, that is completely it. In terms of with Russia feeling surrounded and encroached, I mean, you look at the way that they've sort of what they've done in Georgia. Their ally with Hungary within the European Union as well, Belarus. The annexation of Crimea in 2014. It's been
oh
this
yeah,
constant sort of, and also the way the Russians have infiltrated, sort of, the term like Moscow on Thames, Moscow on the Thames. The sort of Russian money that has seeped through into Britain, and how it's been a play in that regard, and then why it's been so difficult to that the selling of golden visas, for example. Um, it's just this whole sort of economy that's been propped up. You look at donations to the Conservative Party. Of course, you can look at the Labour Party donations, where Barry Gardner accepted money from a Chinese agent, which fuck knows why he did it. But it's that sort of those sort of things at play. So there's a lot of like you said, there's a lot of factors going on.
yeah. With regards to the Conservative Party,
Yeah,
and obviously all of the fallout that's recently happened,
yeah.
um, how
It's been good
likely
to
is it?
watch.
Yeah,
It's been yeah. Sorry.
yeah. No, I was going to ask, like, how likely is it that Liz Truss is going to remain on? Because um, you could effectively make the case that she is well out of her depth
Well,
of the role.
by the time we finish this podcast, she might not even be prime minister. Or by the time it goes out, that's the thing. No one knows. I think we saw with Kwasi Kwarteng. I don't know if you watch Have I Got News for You? It's a show that I've watched since I was quite young. Um, and they before they sort of had the opening credits, I think there was a clip where Jess Phillips, because she was on the panel this week, the week that we're sort of filming, she said by the time this goes out, Kwarteng might not even be Chancellor, and it was cool because they film it on a Thursday, releases on a Friday. So obviously that happened. I don't. Liz Truss is a weird one in that she's been in government for 12 years. It's not like she's just been an MP. She's held government
Yeah.
positions, sort of minor roles, quite big roles. Obviously, as foreign secretary, lead, sort of like if you imagine like a two-pronged fork in a way, with sort of Johnson and Truss leading the UK's role in helping Ukraine. So she put herself on the map. She's definitely a very ambitious person, but I think it's seen that it's completely out of depth. Do you know what it reminds me of? It's like watching your football club, watching your team, and that you think the manager's crap, and the manager one day turns around and goes, "All right, you come on the touchline, you do it, you manage the team," and then you realise how difficult it really is. I think it's a role that she's prepared for her entire life, and always wanted her entire life. Because I think anyone who becomes an MP wants to become prime minister. That is the end goal. That is what you want.
Yeah.
It's why I don't really want to go into that sort of role, because I think it's such a toxic environment. But going back to Liz Truss, I think she is, yeah, it's completely out of the depth. Because
Yeah.
actually, when you look at amongst Tory MPs voting in that leadership contest, a lot of them didn't want her. They wanted Sunak.
Yeah.
They wanted Rishi Sunak to become prime minister, but the Tory membership wanted Truss to become prime minister. So there's two things going on.
Yeah. Why do you think that was?
Why do I think they wanted Rishi Sunak? I
No, no.
think because
Sorry, I understand why they wanted Rishi Sunak, but
yeah,
I don't understand why the party membership voted in
yeah.
Liz Truss.
I think because actually I don't know either. I spoke to a few Tory party members about this, and I think it was sort of hearing lots of it was about she's a low tax conservative. I think because of Sunak there was all the hang up from COVID, and also
Yeah.
I think people forget that Rishi Sunak was fined for breaking lockdown rules. No,
Yeah.
I think that's kind of been glossed under. With all the focus was on Johnson, actually Sunak was also broke the law as well. Um, I think it was because from there to Tory party members to the Tory faithful, she sounded conservative. She sounded like she wanted traditional conservative politics. There was the whole accusation that she was cosplaying as Margaret Thatcher. I don't think she was cosplaying. I think they just wear similar clothing, but it's politics. You're wearing business attire. You're going to end up wearing the same clothing.
Yeah.
Starmer wears a suit. No one's saying that he looks like Tony Blair. No one's saying, oh, he's cosplaying Tony Blair. And with Truss, I think there are some similarities, but I don't think she's cosplaying Margaret Thatcher. But yeah, I think it was because she was seen as being a traditional conservative, that's that sort of resonated with people, and they were like, yeah, we want her to lead the country. And
Yeah.
also, I think there was the Ukraine stuff as well, where it's seen as that she was being a leading figure in that.
Yeah. She's a pretty hawkish figure on leading the front for Ukraine. So I
Yeah,
think that was a big part to play because it was kind of just right time, right place for her in
yeah.
in
Actually,
that
when you
regards.
consider when the war in Ukraine started, when the Russians invaded, it was at a time when Johnson was facing a lot of pressure because of Partygate. So there was a crises, and they say the best time to sort of gain confidence or win an election is during a war. You think of Thatcher in the 80s. If you look at the polling back then, the record unemployment. Falklands happens at the 84 election. They win 83. Is it? Yeah, it was at the 83 election. They win a landslide.
Yeah.
It's that sort of it's because I think in the UK in particular, it kind of harvers back to sort of that, the Blitz spirit, that sort of coming together. We're at war. We're Britain. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. We saw it during COVID. I think, when you think about the clap for carers, that sort of camaraderie, that thing we saw a lot, the sort of helping people. I know in my village, there was a big drive, where volunteers would basically pick up older people's medications or prescriptions or food and drop it off at their house. There was that sort of coming together. So I think, trust clearly inspired, maybe is the wrong word, but sort of clearly people saw that sort of coming together,
Yeah.
which it's been the complete opposite, I think. And I think a lot of Tory party members are regretting voting for her because
Yeah.
she's pretty much U-turned on all of her policies.
Yeah, that's the thing that I don't really understand anymore. I don't understand how she can stay on as PM
Yeah.
when you could effectively make the case that Kwasi Kwarteng was effectively carrying out her vision for the country.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is that Kwarteng is it's quite ironic that so a few months ago Kwarteng signed into law a practice where businesses could replace striking workers with agency workers. Now, in the tweet, and you can find it, and I'll send it to you. Um, they said this practice used to be illegal. Now it's an opportunity for business. Um, and I think it's kind of ironic that we've seen with Kwarteng is that Liz Truss said, right, I need you to do this, right? And Kwarteng's like, all right, okay, I'll do this. I tell you what, I'll even go further because apparently he thought up as scrapping the additional tax band. So he put those policies forward. Fallout happens, it becomes so unpopular, and Truss is like, okay, yeah, you got to go. And like you said, how can she stay on when she was the one putting those policies in place? But it's just a continuation of Johnson. You think about Johnson, announce a policy at 9 o'clock, get ministers defend it at 10, and at 11, you go, hang on, no, we're not going to do it anymore. And then at 12, all the ministers who defended it and now got to say why it's not a good policy in the first place.
Yeah, I think there's a likely chance that she's probably going to get replaced with Rishi Sunak, or
Yeah,
there's even talks of Boris Johnson coming back again.
I don't think there's
I
so
don't know how
much
that's going to go.
baggage, and I think it would just kind of be, do you know, kind of relating it back to football, like you very rarely bring back a manager who's been sacked or resigned. It's very rare.
Yeah,
I can only think of one case. Well, actually, there's been a few cases, but it doesn't always work out. You look at like Allegri with Juventus at the moment; it's not working in that respect. Um, but I couldn't see Johnson come back. Sunak, maybe because MPs wanted him. MPs wanted him to
MPs
be,
did want him,
yeah. But
but
then I think sorry,
sorry, yeah. No, I was going to say MPs did want him, but as soon as Liz Truss became PM, she effectively purged the entire cabinet of Sunak supporters. So
yeah, like
there's
yesterday
a lot
saw
of
that.
bad blood there.
Yeah, I don't, but yeah. So I think, but even then with Sunak is that, I mean, he's an interesting figure. I don't know if you remember during the leadership contest, he admitted, um, and they're saying it was a leaked recording, but when you look at a leaked video, but when you look at the camera angle, the phone is clearly there, like the people are filming it. And he admitted that he tried to undo treasury formulas set up by the Labour Party in the early 2000s that basically allocated funds to deprived urban areas. That's the term that he used. And he wanted to undo those formulas so he could send it to comparatively better off areas. And
Yeah,
this is a guy admitting this, and it's not even. I think at that point he was trailing in the polls against Liz Truss, so he was doing what he could to be like, "Hey guys, look, I can do this, I can do that." It was like when he announced a policy where he wanted to people who vilify Britain would be referred to Prevent, which is the UK's counter-terrorism sort of rehabilitation
okay.
program, and it was just saying these really absurd things that the majority of people
Yeah,
look at and go, "Why would you say that?" But then you have to remember they weren't appealing to the majority of people. They were trying to appeal to what was it, 200,000, 160,000, 200,000 Tory Party members who
yeah,
would hear policies like that and go, "Yeah, no, I agree with that." I think
yeah,
especially in the last couple of years, where any sort of criticism of the UK and its government or its history or culture is seen as vilifying Britain or erasing history.
yeah.
It's that sort of cultural stuff.
I think probably with regards to, I know the video you're talking about. If I do think it's most likely a leaked video that came because the timing just seemed too perfect. The fact that it
Yeah,
came out during the election cycle, and also I don't know the full context of what it was because I did hear him defend it in a interview afterwards, where what he said was he was talking about taking money which had broadly been given out and doing more targeted spending in
yeah,
deprived areas, which I am a fan for. And I think one of the biggest problems is that there is just money being spent in a broad range where instead of doing that, what we really need to be doing is targeted spending, where
yeah.
I don't know if
Yeah,
you saw
target
this.
spending can work. I think we've obviously seen that throughout. I just think with in terms, especially like the hang up of austerity. When you look at austerity, for example, between 2010 to 2015, around 50,000 people died due to austerity-related cases, whether that be due to cuts to public services, cuts to welfare. Um, it did cost lives, and I think that's something we don't really talk about. I think we look at the death toll with COVID, but in terms of austerity, there's not really that. There's not really, no one really looks at that. Um, I yeah, I don't. I couldn't see. It's not that I couldn't see Sunak as prime minister. I think he could. I think he's clearly got something about him. He's got this charm that I can't really place. I hear him. Though when he speaks to people, he does sound like he's speaking to people like they're 5 years old. I don't know if you found that. I feel like with
Yeah,
politicians, there's
yeah,
that way of sort of speaking.
yeah.
Um,
I think when you sign on to politics, and especially when you sign on to become PM, you do kind of sell your soul a bit.
yeah,
So I think
I
there
think
is an
I think
element
that
of
we've
that.
seen that with all the ministers who were in Johnson's government. You know, when Johnson, when the Johnson's premiership kind of reminded me of the game of Jenga, where every block represents a lie or a scandal, and you're closely sort of taking away the blocks. At a certain point, you will remove one block, and it will all come tumbling down. And in the case, the block that was removed that every caused the tower to crumble was the Chris Pincher scandal, where um, Chris Pincher was found to have groped two. I think it was two men or one guy. But he was found to have groped someone, and then he resigned, or he was I think he was sacked, he got sacked or resigned. Where he left the role, and then Johnson denied knowing anything about, because there were also previous allegations about Chris Pincher that were dealt
Yeah,
with internally by the party, um, and Johnson denied being aware of any of these previous allegations. It then transpired that he not only knew about it, he joked about it when appointing Chris Pincher to become deputy chief whip, where he said, "Oh yeah, he's handsy that one, Pincher by name, Pincher by nature," um, and then that's all this stuff starts coming out, and then all these ministers one by one start resigning. Sunak was like the big resignation, and then there was Sajid Javid as well. These big,
yeah,
sort of quite big names within the Tory party at that point who resigned, and then that was the catalyst. All these other ministers started resigning. I mean, with Sunak, it was clearly just prepare for a leadership challenge. I mean, his campaign website had been registered from December 2021, apparently. Um, and so you had all of these ministers resigning, but then you think, all of you aren't doing this because you think it's the right thing to do for the country. You're doing it because it's the right thing for yourself to try and
yeah,
save face. And it's like, if I resign, I look like I've got principle. And it's like, well, you don't. You know, you're doing this to cover your own asses. And I think you could say that for any sort of ministerial resignation when there's a big scandal in any government, regardless of whether it's Conservative or Labour. Um, but it's just this idea of being seen to be doing something. As far as I was concerned, it was all too little, too late. Like, if any of them had any shred of principle or integrity, when Johnson defended Dominic Cummings breaking lockdown laws, then that was the time to go, hang on, no, we're not going to stand for this. We need to. But the thing is that they couldn't, because the Conservative Party at that point relied so heavily on Johnson because he was such a popular figure that you remove him and then a lot of those problems start.
yeah. And I think the fact that he got COVID, combined with the fact that he survived it,
Yeah.
did literally give him that role of a survivor.
Yeah,
And
but that's the thing. He's always prided. He's always wanted his hero is Churchill, you know, and it's sort of Churchill's greatest sort of feat. He's always known for being the prime minister who led Britain during the war. He's often seen as winning the war, because he was seen as a figurehead. Johnson wants to have his Churchillian moment. COVID is a pandemic is completely different to a war, where it's not a case of, oh, gung ho, rally the troops. It's a case of, well, actually, it relies on expert advice. Same with war to a certain extent, obviously, as well, but it's not really the same thing. So when the war in Ukraine happened, Johnson, sorry, gets his moment to be
yeah,
Churchill, and he can be on the front going, yeah, we'll fight them on the beaches. We're allying President, we're working with President Zelensky. We're going to send the Russians back. It's that sort of rhetoric that I feel like he probably practices in the mirror. I think, if I'm being perfectly honest, he definitely did. He does
is
that.
it, do you reckon that's a reason why he became so hawkish on the Ukraine war to get that moment?
I think so, and also I think it was because of the Partygate scandal and everything that was unfolding. It's the perfect cover. It's, oh, why are you going to try and remove me from office? There's a war going on. We need to show our support to the Ukrainians. I think we saw recently when Nadeem Zahawi, a couple of weeks ago, was on Question Time, and he said Vladimir Putin, he wants us to be divided, and it's like, Vladimir Putin doesn't give a shit. Like, it's like it's that sort of constantly linking back to the war. There's a war going on. We need to work together. Well, actually, the UK isn't directly involved. Yes, we are sending arms and we're sending resources, but we're not. We don't actually have troops on the ground
We don't have
who are
troops on the
fighting.
ground, but we
Yeah.
are training troops,
Yeah,
Ukrainian
we're
troops
training.
in the
Yeah, but
country.
we're not directly.
Yeah,
It's not like we're sending.
yeah,
We've got troops to train. We've got people training. We're providing sort of military assistance, but we
yeah.
haven't. We're not directly involved in terms of we've got troops on the ground fighting alongside the Ukrainians.
No, I think that would be a whole new level to the
Yeah,
war.
it's why I
Um,
don't support Ukraine joining NATO, because if Ukraine joins NATO, one of NATO's big rules is that an attack on a NATO state is an attack on all the other states. So all the other
yeah,
states have to send military support, including troops on the ground too. Uh, and in the context, obviously, with the war going on in Ukraine, if Ukraine was to join NATO, well, then UK would have to send
yeah.
troops, and then we would be directly involved, and that's just not something anyone wants.
No, I think there's an effective argument for saying that the war has effectively become a proxy war between Russia and the West because Ukraine would have only survived for like a week into the
Yeah,
war
but
if
actually, I
the
think
West hadn't sent
they
aid.
initially, but I think with the resilience that was seen, I think the Russians said 2 weeks maximum is all it will take to conquer
Yeah.
Ukraine. By 2 weeks, I don't think they made it past the front gate. It
No,
was
but I don't think that the Russians took note of how much aid the West would provide.
Yeah, no, I don't think so either. I think I was aware of what was going on, but like vaguely because I was seeing it in the news, and I was kind of going, "Oh, right," But I think Russia Ukraine tensions have always been quite high, and it's always something that I've kind of been aware of, and I really probably should have been more clued into it, because I was considering I was studying international relations, but it wasn't really something we ever looked at, and maybe it was something I should have just taken the initiative and researched myself. Um, and then I think when um, the invasion officially happened and everyone starts reading on about it, and that's where like all the problems start, because everyone, over the pandemic, everyone was a vaccine expert, was an
Yeah,
epidemiologist. The war happens. Okay, I'm no longer an epidemiologist. I'm actually an international relations expert. It's that sort of, and then it's why when people are advocating for a no-fly zone, it's like, why the fuck would you advocate for that? That would just like cause more war. That would indirectly implicate people. Um, the states. Sorry. So
yeah,
yeah, I just think there's so much danger, and like you said, yeah, I think the support for Ukraine, particularly in the West, like um, I remember like in the Premier League, for example, there was all like the stop the war because there were a lot of Ukrainian players there, and there's sort of that support. I remember at the Carabao Cup final, I'm pretty sure. No, what was it? Yeah, there was obviously like all the sort of the Ukraine. There was obviously all the sort of Ukraine stuff, and I think that was kind of because sort of Roman Abramovich's then ownership of Chelsea. There was a
yeah,
lot of sort of issues with Roman Abramovich as well. But again, he's kind of part of that. He's got quite close ties to Putin. He's an oligarch who, when the collapse of the Soviet Union, bought a lot of the state services that were able to be bought for cheap, and then you sort of run them with those yourself. Um, is sort of what's been happening in Russia.
What's Labour's standing on the Ukraine war?
Labour
If
standing
Labour,
on you.
sorry, if
Labour standing on
yeah,
So Labour standing on the Ukraine war is that they unconditionally support them, and that they will do whatever they can to aid them in fighting against Vladimir Putin. Um, I think there's definitely a change from likely what I don't know what the last leadership would have said about Ukraine. I think we look when the reaction to the Salisbury poisoning, for example, and Corbyn saying that he wanted to we should send the Novichok sample back to Russia for testing. Why would we do that? It's completely stupid. And also, even when you look at what Corbyn, for example, has said about the war in Ukraine, and that we need to cease the fighting. And I don't think people understand, particularly on the left. And I've had this conversation with many people. If Russia stops fighting, the war is over. If Ukraine stops fighting, then there's no more Ukraine. And this idea that the Ukrainians should sue for peace is completely absurd. Like, let's say I came to your house and I took and we were sort of warring over different rooms in the house. It's like, no, this is my house. Like, get out. Like, you're not having any of the rooms. It's not like, all right, let's settle this. I have, the living room and the hallway, and you can
yeah.
have the kitchen and stuff. Like, no, no, no. Like, get out of my house. Um, that's what's been going on, and I don't think a lot of people on the left really get. But yeah, no, Labour's stance at that point is unconditional support, and they will do whatever they can to aid um, sort of the Ukrainians in their war, in their fight to stop Vladimir Putin. I don't know what their stance is on Ukraine joining NATO. I know what this government stance is. Well, I heard Michael Gove talk about this on the Laura Kunzberg show a few weeks ago, and he said he didn't support it, and that's something I agree with personally.
Yeah. How does the current Labour Party differ from Corbyn's party? Because um, it's quite a big shift from that
Yeah,
really heavy left-wing politics to more of a centre-left. And
yeah.
I
Well, I
think
think
Keir
that was
Starmer's done a pretty good job in bringing that round.
that was the big thing. I only joined the Labour Party in January 2020 after the election loss in 2019, the biggest election loss for Labour since 1935. And that was down to multiple factors. I think Labour's Brexit stance, which is something at the time I supported, and now I think no, it shouldn't have, should never have been the policy. Also, Corbyn as well being deeply unpopular as a leader, um, and also there was all the anti-Semitism stuff. I think Keir Starmer, when he became leader of the Labour Party, had very big challenges to deal with. The first one
Yeah.
was, becoming a credible opposition that can become a government. The second is trying to get rid of the Tory Party, though that sort of links. And then the third one was dealing with anti-Semitism within the Labour Party, because it was rife, and I wasn't part of the Labour Party at that point, so I don't know what it was like. But from speaking to Jewish members of the party, they said it was awful, and that you didn't feel like you could talk about it. I think because of the Israel-Palestine conflict is obviously cited a lot. I think
Yeah.
by contrast, when you look at party conference in Liverpool this year compared to 4 years ago, when you had people on the front sort of chairs of that conference waving the Palestinian flag around the time of, and I support the Free Palestine movement, but what I don't support is anti-Semitism. And I think what's been allowed is that people have been able to conflate anti-Semitism with pro-Palestinian liberation. Um, I was speaking to like Labour Friends of Israel about this, and they were sort of in agreement as well. But yeah, no, those were sort of the big challenges that having to deal with as a party. And I think that Starmer has done that. And actually, when you look at polling amongst Jewish Labour members, they are a lot happier with the party and they actually feel like something is being done about it. Whereas I don't know if you've read the ECHR
No.
EHRC report. It's one of those reports where you read it and you read like about it in the media and you go, oh, that's bad, and then you actually read the report and you go, okay, this is really bad. The basically just the brush over sort of the prioritization of different forms of racism, and it's like all forms of racism are deplorable. But even then, like Corbyn's unwillingness to acknowledge anti-Semitism within the Labour Party, um, when he was asked to sort of say that he condemned anti-Semitism, and he goes, "I condemn racism in all its forms." It's like, okay, condemn anti-Semitism though, and it's like, I condemn. Let me be clear, I condemn. It's like, no, no, no. You're not being asked to condemn all of it. Like, obviously you condemn all of it. We've established that, but specifically condemn anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
They couldn't do it. But I mean, I think people are a lot happier in the Labour Party now. I think when I was at conference this year, my first ever one, I wasn't sure what it was going to be like because I'd
Yeah.
heard things about party conference, and I think the year before in Brighton there was still a bit of there was still a lot of division. But I think a lot of the people who have left the Labour Party, it's probably for the best because they're not serious about. It's almost like a grift. It's like, say with my page, for example, you could argue that my page's success relies on having a conservative government in place, and I would agree with that. And I think it's just all part of this sort of grift that people have, where they want to remain in a permanent state of opposition because then they don't really have to deal with the problems. It's like
Yeah.
Jess Phillips said in an interview with Owen Jones, I'm left wing in the real world. And it's about making those pragmatic changes. So moving more towards the centre. Tony Blair talked about this a few months ago, maybe it was a year ago in a talk, where he said, if you're trying to win people over, you have to do it from the centre. If you've got someone who has voted Tory all of their life, what makes you think they're suddenly going to vote for this radical left wing program? They're not going
Yeah.
to do that. You have to appeal from the centre, and then over time you can gradually move people more to the left, talking sort of and promoting more left wing policies. But if you appeal from the centre, you can start winning people over that way. And I think that's kind of what Starmer has done. But then there's also a mix. You look at GB Energy, for example, which is going to be publicly owned. The commitment that to renationalise the railways once their contracts have ended with their current shareholder with their current stakeholders or companies that they're owned by. So there is like a broad range of policies there, and I think it's everything that people can get behind. I think, especially at the moment with the energy crisis, people have seen that the privatized services aren't working. When you've got oil and gas giants making billions in profits off the back of struggling people, um, it's almost like, well, it's clearly not working.
Yeah, I think with regards to the energy crisis, that's something, especially in the last couple of years, during COVID as well, that's kind of been
Yeah,
brought to light quite heavily because
yeah,
I think for every nation, especially the UK, which is an island nation, being
yeah,
energy independent is something that's really important. And I think
yeah.
there's a big push towards getting us into that direction. So
Well, that's the thing.
there's
Yeah, we
heavy,
are, and
yeah, sorry, I was going to say
you know,
there's heavy investment in solar, wind, and nuclear as well now,
yeah.
which is obviously a good step.
Yeah. I think we saw, like, I don't know if you saw the other week, Greece, for the first time in their history, the whole country was run 100% on renewable energy. And that's what we should be pushing for. Think like, yeah, as you said, we're an island nation. It's fucking windy. We should be investing in this stuff, and we should be looking towards the future um, for renewables, because oil is all a finite resource, and it's not going to be around forever. And look at the damage that it's doing to the planet as well. We need to be more pragmatic, and I think that's kind of what Labour have done in terms of pushing for green policies. Under Johnson, there did seem to be this push for green policies, though when you look at the raw sewage being dumped into British waters, there was a bit of like, are you sure? Liz Truss seems to have just gone, yeah, we're not going to do that. We're not committing to, we're not that fussed about committing to net zero or any of this. We'll start fracking again in this country, and it's like, why?
Yeah.
Like, it's but then I think it's appealing to the Tory party faithful. It's like, back in my day, we didn't do that. It's like, okay, all right, but it's not your day anymore. It's our day. Like, come on, we need to modernize.
Do you think the Labour Party is a lot more united now from the Labour
On the
conference?
face of it, I think it appears united. I've definitely felt very comfortable there as someone who was probably centre left. When I was there, there was no like issues. People weren't like, "Oh, you're this, you're that," because going to conference, like I did get recognised from TikTok, and everyone was very lovely. Everyone who came up to say hello was really lovely. And there were some good conversations there. There was no, yeah, there was no like, there didn't seem any problems. Like, I think you expect with the leader speech there might be a few heckles, but there was nothing. There was nothing but unity there. But then I think a lot of the people who don't like the Labour Party at the moment aren't in it anymore. And also because there's been a lot of expulsions due to anti-Semitism, prescribed groups, for example. Um, there has been that. There has been. It does, on the face of it, that the party does appear united. Um, but then I think a lot of people will be upset about certain things being done, and I've often said, like, the people who are shouting the loudest aren't actually in the party, or they don't really care about winning. They don't care about actually making the difference. It's all about ideological purity, which has always been the downfall of the left. This commitment, and also kind of seeing it with the riots, but say with Liz Truss as well, with her policies, her ideology, this commitment to ideological purity that on paper, yeah, can work, but then in the real world, not so much.
Yeah.
And that you have to adapt, and that you have to be pragmatic. It's like pragmatic politics in a way. And I think with the budget that was announced, it was the mini budget that got announced a few weeks ago. Truss and Kwarteng in 2012, along with Dominic Raab, Preeti Patel, and I think Chris Skidmore, they co-wrote a book called Britannia Unchained, which advocated for the same policies that we saw announced in that mini budget. And look at what's happened. Look at what's happened to the country. So it just proves that ideological purity doesn't work. And I think in terms of Labour, they've kind of gone, okay, all right, we need to be more pragmatic.
So what kind of stuff got covered in the Labour conference then?
There was all sorts of stuff that was covered. A big thing, there was a debate on a motion for the Labour Party to push forward PR, proportional representation, to replace first past the post. That was something that was discussed. That motion passed. It hasn't become Labour Party policy. I don't think it will. Um, I couldn't see it, especially at the moment. I think the idea of trying to, I think out of all the things all the biggest priorities in this country at the moment, and all the things that need to be dealt with, reforming the voting system isn't that high on the list, nor
Yeah, I
should it
understand.
be.
Yeah.
Um, there was the stuff about sort of the renationalisation of railways once their contracts end with their various with the companies that own them now. There was GB Energy, which was announced at conference. Um, there was reversing the top rate of there was reversing the decision to scrap the additional what's it scrapping the additional tax ban. The Tories announced that they then U-turned on. Labour said that they would return that and then use the money that was created from that to invest in the health service. There was also, I think, there was the push to have a national care service because there's not like a state like care service for say OAPs, people who are disabled. Um, there's not that support. It's all private and it's also really expensive. And by sort of creating, and also carers are on very low rates of pay. And now, of course, you could argue that that shows that they actually want to do it. Like that shows dedication. It's why you could argue that you don't want people going into professions solely for the money. Which can always, it's like when people go, why do you want to be it's like, I want to be a lawyer. Why do you want to be a lawyer? Well, they get paid a lot of money, right? So you don't really care about all you care about is money, which is fair enough, but just admit that. um but yeah, no, there was that as well. I'm trying to think what else. There was a lot. Yeah, no, I'll see if there was any more, but those were like the main things that stood out to me personally.
What um what is Labour's policy or kind of vision going forward for the NHS? Because obviously the NHS is
Yeah,
um well, it's obviously under
yeah.
a lot of stress, and I wouldn't necessarily say it's even a case of underfunding. It's just mismanagement of funding, if anything.
Yeah, I don't know too much about that, what their policy is. I think the thing is with the NHS in the UK is that it is the closest thing the UK has to a unit to a religion, like a state religion. Obviously, Britain is a multicultural society, and there's like there's lots of different religions, different cultures. But the NHS seems to be the one thing that binds everyone together. You think like the 2012 Olympics, for example, there was a big focus on the NHS. That was something that was celebrated, and I think it is something that should be celebrated. Um, I honestly don't know. The thing is, it's there are if you look at in Europe, mainland Europe, for example, there are there are different types of healthcare service. I think we've kind of got into this thing where it's like we see healthcare as binary, where there's state like state healthcare, or there's like the US model,
Yeah,
and that's not the case. There are loads of different models for healthcare that should all be explored. I remember Wes Streeting talking about it and he said it was likely that some privatization might be needed in order to deal with the problems that are being faced. I honestly don't know because I was always someone who's like, keep the NHS. I think if you said to me keep or abolish the NHS, I would say keep, but I'm open to different types of healthcare models. Something I need to look into. Like I know this in Germany is like the Bismarck model, which is kind of I don't really want to. I'm not going to talk about it because I'm not too clued up on it. Um, but there are different healthcare systems out there that should all be explored. I think the second it's like you're removing the NHS, that's when like people get into a frenzy. It's like, no, can't take away our NHS. We love the NHS. My parents worked in the NHS. My nan worked in the NHS. It's because people are close ties to it, and it's a very big employer in this country.
yeah. I think it might be the biggest employer in the country. I'm not
Yeah,
entirely sure, but I think
it's one of the biggest employer. Yeah, like it's a massive employer in this country, and it's something that attracts the best and brightest around the world that want to come to the UK to work in the NHS. Um, but even then, I mean, like we're seeing it with junior doctors in the UK, the stress that they're under. Well, they end up going to Australia, and they're far happier over there. And after 3 4 years, they can get I think it's either residency or citizenship. So
yeah,
there's sort of that, and it's trying to make it more attractive. But I think the initial cuts that were made to the health service at the start of the 2010s due to austerity, again, it all links back to. I think a lot of the problems in this country link back to austerity, and even actually even further because a lot of the fund cuts to public services were happening around 2007 2008 when the Labour Party were in charge. Um, it was just a continuation of that. So I think there does need to be some reform. I don't know all too well. I'll probably go away now and look more into it. But I think it's there's more health models other than the NHS, and they should be explored, and then it's be decided which is the best one to do, and that
Yeah.
should be expert driven. Not we should not have a referendum on whether to keep or abolish the NHS, because I think that
Mm.
would be disastrous, and referendums don't work anyway.
Like, do you think that's a possibility?
I don't know, because I think it's become so entrenched in people's minds that the NHS
Yeah.
is like a big part of UK culture.
Yeah,
It's
no,
like,
that's what I was thinking.
I maybe, but I feel like the person who does it will either be the most unpopular figure in Britain or the most popular if they reform it and patient satisfaction goes up. Because at the moment it's at all-time lows. I don't know. Therese Coffey announced that you would get they said you wouldn't wait longer than you wouldn't wait any longer than 2 weeks for a GP appointment, and I think 48 hours for it was either A&E. I think I can't remember like the exact. It was something along those lines, and actually, it's like that shouldn't be the case in a country like the UK. That we should not be saying
Yeah.
2 weeks for a GP appointment. Um, that there needs to be there's a far more efficient service. But yeah, I don't know what the alternative is. Definitely not the US model of healthcare, because actually they spend more on healthcare per citizen than we do here in the UK. Now, of course, you could argue that they're a bigger country, but then and different health issues. But yeah, so I honestly don't know.
What's Labour's stance on immigration?
I don't know. See, that's the
And
thing. So
sorry, with regards to obviously legal immigration and the illegal immigration that's going on at the
yeah,
moment.
so the first thing, there's no such thing as illegal immigration. No one can be illegal, and the way that the UK asylum system works here is that you have, in order to claim asylum, you have to be on British soil. So the only way you can do that is if you can't, get on a plane or whatnot, and you have to make that difficult journey across the channel, then that is the only way you can get there in order to claim asylum. And now the
Okay, is
UK,
that how
there's a
it
lot of
works?
pushback. Yeah, that's how it works. You have to be on UK soil in order to claim asylum.
Okay,
Um, Now,
seems like
obviously,
a
there are
catch-22.
yeah, it's a bit like it's kind of like that weird sort of like it's a very sort of weird system, and there's been a lot of pushback, particularly around sort of Brexit, for example. There was a lot of push for stronger controls in immigration. The thing is that in order to control immigration, it relies on cooperation with other states. So when Britain was a member of the European Union, they were part of what was called the Dublin Agreement, where member states within that work together in order to control levels of immigration. So it's like saying, okay, we're trying to process this many people, hold fire with those guys, and when we process them, you can let them come through. Because we're no longer in that agreement, there's no obligation for states to cooperate with that. So in terms of controlling uh, asylum seekers, refugees coming across the English Channel, it relies on cooperation with the French. Now, if the French don't want to cooperate, okay, they're just like, oh, send them your way. Actually, when you look at numbers of in terms of asylum seekers, refugees, the UK accepts less than France and definitely less than Germany. We don't accept that many. I think it's just because it's a lot of media reporting about it that we think it's a massive issue. In terms of Labour stance on it, they want to deal with it, but I think it's more sort of dealing with the people trafficking elements of it and the people
Yeah,
smugglers, because that is a major issue. These are people who are exploiting some of the most desperate people on the planet,
yeah,
and making a lot of money from it. And that's the thing we should also acknowledge. A lot of the asylum seekers and refugees that are coming across the channel, they are back in their respective countries, they are considered well off. They're spending a lot of money. These are people who are considered, and the people who aren't well off, they're the ones still in those respective states. Um, these are and I always say, oh, well, these people can be doctored and they can help. And it's like, that shouldn't matter. These are people that need help. And and this country is often identified as being a Christian country. One of the biggest Christian teachings is love thy neighbor. And so we should be helping these people. They want to crack down on the sort of the people smuggling elements of it. And those people should be held to account, and they should be in prison for what they do, for exploiting vulnerable people like that. Um,
how would
but
you
I
go
don't
about
know.
doing that?
How would I personally go about doing that? I don't
Or
know what.
what can be done to make
Well, for starters, so the aspect, the criminal agent, the agency that deals with people smugglers have had their budget slashed quite a bit by this government. Now, if you have less funding, then there are less things that you can do. So there needs to be that thing as well. There's also the government, you get people suggesting that the navy should patrol the British waters to pick up people. Now, under international and send them back. Well, under international maritime law, those people are if you the first thing is like if you see someone at risk in sea, you help them. So they're going to be helped. They're going to be brought up, and they'll be taken to the UK or sent back, depending on if there's an agreement made with France. Obviously, there's like the Rwanda deal as well, which is a whole. Don't even know where to begin with that one.
Has that
But there's
been implemented? The Rwanda
So
deal?
yeah, the Rwanda deal is a thing, but it is not. There's been no planes taken off yet. There's been no asylum seekers put on planes. There's been no refugees. The idea is that they're creating processing centres in Rwanda to process asylum seekers and refugees, but they're not actually going to get admitted back to the UK. They're just going to get integrated within Rwandan society. Um, Now, I don't know about you, but if I was said I was going to go from one country to another, and I got to that country, and then they sent me to another country, be a bit miffed. The intention of sort of moving in, and also there was a report that was done on Rwanda as a state and their sort of the way that they paid, and it found that that their government had killed political opponents, and the LGBTQ plus refugees and asylum seekers would be at risk of persecution in that state. Um, why we would put people through that, I don't know. I don't, you know, definitely don't agree with that. But also, I think it's also costing the British taxpayer millions. And it would be cheaper. I think they found it would be cheaper to house refugees in the Ritz than it would to send them to Rwanda. Just to give you an idea of sort of the cost element of it. Um, but I think again, policies like that, it's just a dog whistle. It's just to get people to shake their fists and infuse, because there is a particular type of person in the UK that sees the suffering of people less fortunate themselves, and they get off on it because it makes them feel better about their circumstances. Um, so yeah, I think there's always that thing as well.
Do you think the Labour Party is going to be able to bring the nation together? Because I'd probably say, due to a lot of reasons, that we are at a time where everyone's kind of equally divided
Yeah.
in terms of pretty much everything. How can the Labour Party kind of turn that around and kind of bring it?
I think it will take more than just a political party. It requires so many different factors of bringing a nation together. Because you think we've had 6 years the last 6 years of a lot of political turbulence where people have turned against one another. I've seen it. Where people's families are completely split solely on how they voted on Brexit. Because Brexit, to a lot of people, it's almost like if you're speaking to someone about sort of political topics, and it's like, how did you vote, leave or remain? And that will decide how you interact with that person following that conversation. I think it's sort of addressing a lot of different factors. It won't just be a political party that makes the difference. It's a lot of different people sort of coming together and trying to be as pragmatic as possible. I honestly don't know what the answer is, because I think it will take years to restore any sort of sense of unity in this country. I can't see it. It won't happen within a year, maybe not even 2 years. It will take way longer than that. But even then, you never know what's going to happen. 5 years on from now, they completely change and the whole country becomes divided again. We're always going to be, I think, we're always going to appear on the basis of a divided nation. In fact, the only times I've seen this country properly united is during the World Cup and the Euros, and even then, like the fallout from that, like then the whole division start coming back again. So it's really, I honestly don't know. But as I said, I don't think it will just be a change in political party that causes any unity. It will be a lot of different factors. I don't know what those factors are going to be.
Thank you. I think. Sorry, just one sec. Yeah, I think Labour's probably got quite a good chance of winning the next election, especially
Yeah, when you look at
with everything going on. But I think, yeah, I never thought of it until you said it, but it probably is going to take way more than a political party to bring the
Yeah,
country
well,
together.
when you look at polling, Labour are doing a lot better than Conservatives, and that can be put down to multiple factors. I would say that the Conservatives are completely trashing the economy, and there's also like that sort of, well, what's the alternative? Because that's what first past the post creates. It's like almost seen as like the lesser of two evils system, kind of what with like the American presidential system they use for elections. It's like, okay, well, I don't want you, but also I'll vote for you, not because I want you, it's just I don't want him. Um, it's that sort of system in place. I think it's likely that Labour will. I don't know what the majority would be like. In the current polling, it would be a landslide. But at the end, we don't know. There might be another twist of the tail, and the Conservatives could claw it back. Could they at this point? It's not looking likely. We don't know when the next election will be. By next month, we may have one if Truss gets forced out, because I don't think they could force Truss out and then go through a leadership contest within themselves.
No, I think
And
they
then
can't do that for a year or
no, they
something.
wouldn't. Yeah, they can't do it for a year. But then I think under the current rules, I'm sure, because it's not a it's not like a what's it, codified constitution in a sense. Like they can completely, it's uncodified, so they can change the rules if they want to.
Okay.
I don't. Yeah, I feel like in the current circumstances, they will probably make some concessions and force her out. But when that will be, we don't know. Sooner rather than later, hopefully. Um, but again, I think if that does happen and she is forced out, let the Tories elect a new leader and then go to the polls. I think people deserve that. I think, that we've had what in the time it took me to do my GCSEs, A levels, and my degree. I had we'd had three prime ministers and there was a fourth one on the way. That
Yeah.
shouldn't happen. And also, it's been what we have four chancellors every month of the year. It's completely absurd, and we shouldn't, as a country, stand for it. We deserve stability, and at the moment, we're not getting it.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that. We deserve stability, and also we definitely do deserve better as a nation than what we are currently being given. That's for
Yeah,
sure.
definitely. And I don't do. I think the Labour Party will will be, kind of a lot of people would just see it as a concession. I think one of the biggest criticisms of Starmer is that he's boring, but actually, I mean, I don't personally don't think he is, but also, is that such a bad thing when you consider the eccentric leaders we've had? Like, we don't need a comedian, we don't need a, we don't need comedians or showmans in charge. We need, strong pragmatic leadership. And when you look at Starmer, his record as a public servant, a dedicated public servant, working in the CPS and the services that he provided there, this and as leader of the opposition, it's a guy who clearly is a statesman, knows what he's doing in that respect. But I guess we'll see. Who knows? Maybe in 10 years' time, I'll be advocating for a Conservative Prime Minister. But I don't. I honestly don't know. I feel like at this point, it can only. Who knows?
Do you think he will be able to deliver on his leadership? Because obviously,
Well, that's the
like you're
thing. One of the
saying,
biggest.
it's
One of the
easy to kind of stand in the opposition and say you can do this and that and that. But when push comes to shove, do you think he will be able to follow through on his promises?
Yes, you see, that's the thing. One of the biggest criticisms of Starmer was that he wasn't following. He abandoned a lot of his 10 leadership pledges. And that was kind of cited as, well, if we're calling out Johnson for not for basically U-turning everything, like how can, and Starmer's calling him out for that, why Starmer U-turned a lot of his leadership pledges. For me, I understand why people felt that way. For me personally, I think it's all well and good saying you're going to do A, B, C, but when it comes to actually implementing those, it might be okay. We can't do A, we can't do A, we can't do C. We might be able to do B. It's just about being, again, it's about being pragmatic. It's like saying in football terms, if you're playing a 4-4-2 and that formation isn't working, you switch around some of the players and it's still not working again. You change formation, you try something different. You're pragmatic. That's what you need to be. I think a lot of Labour's policies at the moment resonate with a lot of people. And I think, I mean, you clearly look at, say, like their energy plan, their bills for energy plan. Um, I honestly don't know. I would like to say yes, and I will say yes. Maybe I'll be proved wrong. I hope I'm not, because, it's not about pride, it's about the country. And I think it's about helping. It's about helping people. But again, I honestly don't know. I'm going to say yes because I think
Yeah.
that there will be.
So what's next for you? What's next for the Champagne Socialist?
So TikTok is obviously still going, and my account is probably on its last legs at this point. I've got that little sexy account warning there. But
Yeah,
touch wood, that won't go
uh,
anywhere.
do you want to talk to me about that? What happened?
It's because like some of my videos have been taken down because they've been flagged for like I'll give you an example. I got banned from going live for adult content and nudity. Bearing in mind, I was probably wearing the jumper I'm wearing now, which I'm religiously stuck to, and I was fully clothed. So quite how I was got done for nudity, I'm not too sure. Adult content, I don't remember talking about anything particularly adult or adult content, but maybe I'll be proved wrong. Um, so that was how I got banned from going live. Then in regards to the whole account warning thing, it's just because videos get flagged, people mass report it. I did a video criticizing leftists who condemn Western imperialism, but don't call out Russia or China for their role in their sort of their imperialism. Um, and then that video got flagged as well, but then it got restored. That's the thing. A lot of my videos will get flagged, and then I contest it, and then they get reinstated. Sometimes it doesn't happen. So that's just a case of me building up a load of violations, content violations. So I honestly don't know when the account will end. I've got like some insurance policies in place at this point. I'm building a second account as well. So, but and again, yeah, I honestly don't know like what's going to happen. So, but then I'm also working with a outlet called Byline Times, which is an independent media outlet, completely subscriber funded. And I actually was in London yesterday filming with them, talking to Extinction Rebellion protesters and sort of Just Stop Oil guys. So there's stuff in the pipeline and doing stuff, and I'm enjoying it, but I'm taking it at my own pace.
Yeah,
I I feel like with a lot of this stuff, it can blow up really fast, and I like consistency. I want to run things at my own level. Like recently, I was a couple of months ago, I was approached to do a TV show that's currently being aired at the moment, and I was really interested in doing it, and I wanted to do it, and then I went through the audition process, and unfortunately, I didn't get it, and I was really bummed about it because I was like, I really wanted to do it, and then actually, I thought to myself, I wasn't ready to do that sort of stuff because it's one thing like me controlling on TikTok. That stuff that I put out, I edit that, I run it myself. I'm in control of that. But being on TV, a show that's been edited that you're not in control of, that can be quite daunting. And also there's the whole like privacy element as well, because I'm quite a private person in terms of, though I have quite a fairly big platform, I suppose. I have managed to maintain a lot of anonymity in a way, in that people know my first name, they know my age, they know where I stand politically, but you guys don't really know where I live. You don't really know
yeah,
my last name, for example, which is something I keep very private because it's not only just me that gets affected; it's everyone else around me.
yeah,
So I'm private in that sense. So that was the thing that like really sort of dawned for me. I was like, shit, if I go on TV, like people will know all of this sort of stuff, and I'm just not ready for that yet. So yeah, I take it at my own pace for a lot of it. But the byline stuff is coming along really well. I'm really enjoying working with those guys, putting out content for them. And it's it's a symbiotic relationship. So we work for each other, and
yeah.
that's been really good. And that was actually something that because that was another thing. Like I approached them. It wasn't a
Okay.
case of them approaching me. I literally like I saw they followed me on TikTok, and I followed them back. I was like, oh, I really like you guys. And if you ever want to work on anything, let me know. And they were like, yeah, let's do something. And that was me making that happen. Um, I want to take, like I said, I want to take things at my own pace. I like being in control of stuff. If I'm not in control of it, I don't like it. It's kind of, it's just one of those things. And people may be like, oh, it's a bit, narcissistic, a bit controlling, but it's like, no, this is my life. And it's not only my life, it's other people around me that
No,
I
I
care about.
understand that completely. No,
And I think, so, I'm very much in the mindset of, I don't begrudge anyone doing that. It's why, like, yeah, I'm very sort of. Again comes back to being pragmatic, and that's why I like to think I am.
yeah. What's it like talking to Extinction Rebellion?
That was really interesting. That was really fun because obviously we've seen a lot of them in the media at the moment, and a lot of the
Yeah.
tactics that they were pulling, and actually
Um,
where we
sorry, I was going to ask, how?
gone, by the way, but I hope it all still picks up.
Yeah, it does.
But
Also, I was going to ask, how would someone go about getting in touch with them?
no, we literally we just so there was a what was called a festival of rebellion yesterday outside the Tate Modern,
Okay.
and we just rocked up, and we just started speaking to people. It's really easy to just get in contact, especially those sort of things. We just went up to people and was like, "Hi, would you guys like be interested in asking some questions for Byline Times?" Some people say no, fair enough, you can't. And then other people are like, "Actually, yeah, you know what? Let's have a conversation." And we were asking them just one question. We said, "How far is too far when it comes to protests against climate change?" And that was like the opening question, and then we just kind of went from there, like hearing what they had to say, and we would base our follow-up questions on what they were saying. So it was a really good experience, because obviously we've seen a lot of them in the media, and there's been a lot of stuff on social media as well about how they're this and that. And I was speaking to, and my main takeaway is that these are people who genuinely care. They're not doing it because they like being a nuisance. They're doing this because they genuinely care, and the things that they're doing, they genuinely believe in. Um, and we spoke to people who had done sit-ins on roads, and I asked them, like, what's been the response, and they said it's been fairly positive, which surprised me. And I think in the
Really?
footage from the interviews, I was like, "Oh, really?" And then yeah, obviously you've had some negative responses, but they said the worst thing was that people just ignore them, and like they just walk past them. And but no, it was really good to speak to those people, and very like very intelligent people who clearly care about cause. And you can't fault them in that sense. You can argue that their tactics are divisive and counterproductive, and I would definitely argue that um, at the time. But then speaking to them, I understood why they do it. I may not necessarily agree with it, but I understand why they do it.
Okay. Interesting. That'll be someone I'd be quite interested to kind of get in touch with.
Yeah, literally, like if you look on their socials, and you'll see when their demos are, or their rallies, just rock up and just start speaking to people, because people want to talk. They want to get themselves out there. They want to promote their cause, and that was literally what we did. We just rocked up. We planned it. I knew we were going to do it about a couple of days ago, and it was just we just rocked up, and we just got going. And it's been a very enjoyable experience.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you very, very much for your time.
No, thank you.
It's been
Thank you for
really
having me.
interesting.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you. It's been
Yeah,
good fun.
no, it's been quite interesting having you on and listening to everything.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for giving me the platform. I really appreciate it. We'll get going. But no, I really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me, Alan. I really appreciate it.
No, cheers. Thank you, Harry.
All right,
Thanks so
see you later.
much. I appreciate it. Cheers. Bye.